getting ahead to. I take three just case studies, classic examples of how these two worldviews collide. The heliocentric concept of the universe and the geocentric concept of the universe, meaning is it sun-centered or is it earth-centered? And then I take creation versus evolution. And then I take time. The relativistic notion of time, scientific, modern scientific, and the biblical concept of time. And I contrast these two. And through these working examples, you then see how these assumptions play out both from the Bible and from modern science. I really go to show, the point of the book is to show that modern science hasn't closed the case on any of this, because it's often overstepping its bounds when it comes to some of these things. The Copernican view is thought to have destroyed the church ever since, and the Bible, because the church, Protestant and Catholic, stood on the literal interpretation. The Bible says the sun moves, that means it really has to move. But actually the truth is, we see the sun moving all the time. It appears to us that the sun moves. And that's all the Bible's trying to say. That's all it's talking about. When it says in the Bible the sun moved across the sky, when it says the earth's never to be moved, that's the way the world appears to us. It always appears that way, and it always will appear that way. And instead of the churches taking such a strict, literal take on it, I realize they didn't have phenomenology back then, but if they'd stopped to think, well, this is how the world appears, there's truth to that too. Creation, evolution, yeah. There's only two kinds of thought when it comes to the creation, evolution issue. Either you're a creationist, not meaning a literal six-day creationist, which is fine, or an evolutionist. The problem is people confuse the two. If you're an evolutionist, a Darwinist, a neo-Darwinist, there is no teleology, there is no design, there is no goal in mind toward which life is being directed. It's totally happenstance, it's totally natural. This is what Darwin was trying to do. That's what he did, or he thought he did. Jettison everything supernatural. There's no life world, there's no spirit, there's no God, there's no creator. It's just atoms in the void colliding together and making natural substances, and here we are. Which to me is ridiculous. And to most people too, and that's why you'll often hear people say, well, I believe in evolution, but I think God had a hand in it. Well, you're a creationist now. You're not a Darwin, you're not an evolutionist, because it's totally naturalistic. That's the whole point. That's the whole point of Darwin, of evolution, is to get rid of anything. Like I said, science brackets everything that's supernatural and focuses on the natural. So when science says this is our theory of how it happened, legitimately, they can't bring God in. And that's what they're doing. They're telling you the best they can. The problem is when people like Richard Dawkins and other people start sidestepping these bounds and saying in some kind of way, well, that proves there's no God. You crossed over a boundary now. That's not your area. Leave that to philosophers and theologians. Because you have no way of proving there's no God. It's a universal negative. You can't even prove that. You can't even prove why universal negative is wrong. It's unprovable. Because you can't prove the laws of logic. But that's another story. And the issue of time. Einstein's relative theory of time. Very problematic. Time is an interesting phenomenon. The problem with Einstein's theory of time is he tries to, what should I say? Well, it's integral to his whole theory of relativity. The math, the laws of Galileo's laws of motion. Taking an object moving from point A to point B takes a certain amount of time, therefore you can calculate the velocity when you know all those things. This is how the world works, this is how we figure things out, there's certain laws, there's certain rules. Well, when you apply those to Maxwell's electromagnetic theory, well, it just doesn't work, So Einstein says, well, something has to change here. I can't change the speed of time because I'm assuming, big assumption, I'm going to assume that that's the constant. In other words, it's very abstract. And now we're going to take something that we perceive every day, which is time, and we're going to make that a variable. Well, speed of light's constant, time has to change. And then all of a sudden you got all these physicists that are thinking that time is some kind of, it's fabric of space-time. And it's always changing. And You know, when you go to the speed of light, things slow down, and eventually you're like, well, long story short, if you go to the speed of light, you're everywhere at once. There's no more distance, there's no more time. That's the infinity of the equation that doesn't pan out, because there's no infinities in the world. And that's where the system breaks down. That's why it's not right, especially when it comes to time. Biblical notion of time is just the same one that we perceive today. This is what time is. There's a before, there's a now, there's an after. There's actually time is all wrapped up in space, because, and not in the sense of space-time, but it's matter in motion. It's actually wrapped up in motion, not space, which is movement through space. If there was no motion, you wouldn't perceive any time. If nothing moved, you couldn't perceive any time. Which is kind of the same thing Einstein's theory is saying, but in a wrong-headed way. Because you see these people sometimes, they're like, I've seen this, and this is one of the things that really makes me shake my head. At the edge of a black hole, everything freezes. You know, it's ridiculous. There's a sense of truth to that, because you can't have time without motion, but anyway, in other words, it's what the phenomenologist Edmund Husserl said, or referred to as intellectual play. Einstein's theory is all intellectual play. Meaning it's fun to do the math, it's fun to do a lot of thought exercise, thought experiments, and exercise of what happens with this, what about that. You know, that's not the way the world works. It doesn't apply to the real world. There could be other explanations. Say the theory of gravity, that's another story anyway. Nobody knows what it is. Just theories. After that, I really get into the theological aspect of the book, which is really the part of the book I wanted to write. I'm not even sure what the title. It's Phenomenology, the Bible, and modern science, where I go into more of just what I've been explaining. I really flesh it out. The Bible's human perspective is really my favorite chapter of all, because it really shows through the parables of Christ, number one, how Christ's concept of reality was what he saw every day. People, places, things, food, drink, wheat in a field, sheep, whatever. This is what he saw as reality. And that's what we see as reality as well. That's what's real. One of my critiques of science is, this book only appears to be solid. It's really a bunch of subatomic, particle clouds that are just always moving. Well, it's solid enough for me. And that's the way it appears, and it appears that way for a reason, because God made the world in a way that it could be tangible and perceptible. And if we saw it as scientists say it really is, it's just this huge cloud of energy, we couldn't even function in the world. You couldn't even drive your car to work. It'd be worse than drunk driving. Thank God that we can't see those things, which is probably why at the quantum level they don't know what the heck's going on, because it's all objective, subjective interaction, which is what reality is anyway. A phenomenon that's at a really extremely minuscule level that we have no reason to see. Anyway, I really flesh out through those parables, the Good Samaritan especially, the kind of person that Christ wants us all to be, which is to be a loving, caring, a good, decent, honest person. All the things science can't tell you to do. And then at the end of the book, my last chapter is really wrapping up what I've said very briefly, but then going on into more of the cultural, social critique that science really requires of us. Things like weapons design. This country right now is going crazy with weapons design. It always has for the last 50 years, really. Science works overtime, making ways to kill people. And I hate that. That's not what we should be doing with our time and our energies. We should be trying to distribute food to the hungry and grow new crops and increase liberty and freedom to people and impose upon people their need to care for their moral obligation to care for others, whether it's employers, employees, family members, neighbors, friends. That's what's most important in life. And like I said, the book's it's not lengthy, but it's not too lengthy. It should be a good read. It's indexed as well. I wouldn't write a book without an index because I don't hardly buy a book without an index, a nonfiction book, because I like to go back and refer to it and find something I'm looking for, which I've already had to do with my book. So anyway, I hope this helps somewhat. The World Proceed, 1995, shipping and everything on Amazon. If you live here in town, I'll sell you one cheap. Anyway, thank you for your time, and God bless you. Have a nice day. The relativistic notion of time, scientific, modern scientific, and the biblical concept of time, and I contrast these two. And through these working examples, you then these things. The Copernican view is thought to have destroyed the church ever since, and the Bible, because the church, Protestant and Catholic, stood on the literal interpretation, the concept of the universe, and the geocentric concept of the universe, meaning is it sun-centered or is it earth-centered? And then I take creation versus evolution, and then I take time and see how these assumptions play out both from the Bible and from modern science. I really go to show, the point of the book is to show that modern science hasn't closed the case on any of this, because it's often overstepping its bounds when it comes to some of these, where I'm getting ahead to. I take three just case studies, classic examples of how these two worldviews collide. The heliocentric